First, as I said, Energy Minister Chris Bowen has completely bungled the government's on-the-ground reaction to a diesel, petrol and avgas crisis driven by conflict in the Middle East. It is staggering, truly staggering, to discover that with all the resources of the Federal Public Service and access to logistics experts across the nation, there was no plan in place. No day-by-day guide on what to do when Australia, which relies disgracefully on mostly imported fuel to keep the country running. Nothing. There was no plan. Even worse, Bowen was telling Parliament in question time as soon as last Tuesday, there's no crisis, there's no supply issues, nothing to see here, boats are arriving, it's the other side of politics causing panic, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
Fundamentally, Australia's fuel security is strong. That is the point we are making. That is why there is no need for people to panic buy or to order 100 or 200% of what they normally order, which is what the Service Stations Association told us was happening across the country.
It was Tuesday. I mean, seriously, this bloke who treats question time as some performance act, bouncing on his toes and wagging his finger at anyone who disagrees with his blind, almost religious obsession with plastering the nation with wind turbines, solar panels and transmission lines, carving ugly scars through the native bush and across food-producing farmland, this bloke deserves to be sacked. In the space of 3 days since his assurance that we don't have a problem to today, when he had to back up his useless move yesterday to release 100 million litres of so-called dirty petrol, 91 RON, and not diesel fuel, which is desperately needed by farmers, trucking companies and the fishing industry. I mean, seriously, have a look at what he's doing now.
We have decided, on my recommendation, to reduce the minimum stock obligation.
Good day, Australia. Imagine announcing to the entire country that you have solved a crisis, then quietly forgetting to sign the forms that actually solve the crisis. That is not a plot from a comedy sketch. That is Chris Bowen's week in a nutshell. Welcome to the Australian Mind. If you are new here, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because this is the kind of story that deserves more attention than it is getting. Let us walk through this carefully, because the timeline here is genuinely extraordinary. On Wednesday, Energy Minister Chris Bowen stood before the Australian public and said there was no need to be concerned about the supply of diesel and petrol. Calm, reassuring, authoritative, the kind of tone that says, "Trust me, I have got this completely under control." By Friday, just 48 hours later, the same Chris Bowen was standing before Parliament announcing a national crisis. Wednesday, nothing to see here. Friday, national crisis. That is not crisis management. That is a man discovering the building is on fire because he can smell smoke from inside his own office. Now here is where it gets truly spectacular. In Parliament, Bowen announced a series of measures to ease the pressure on fuel markets. The centrepiece, temporarily relaxing fuel sulphur standards to allow Queensland's Lisson refinery to pump out approximately 200 million extra litres of fuel over the next 60 days. Bold announcement, serious numbers, the kind of press conference that is designed to project competence and urgency. There was just one small problem. The paperwork had not been signed, not even close to signed. According to reports, final approval was not expected until the end of the following week. So, Bowen walked into Parliament, announced an immediate solution to a national crisis, and apparently forgot to mention that the solution required a 17-person committee to sign off on it first. 17 people, a fuel standards consultative committee, who must advise whether to approve, conditionally approve, or reject the request, in the middle of a national fuel emergency. You genuinely could not make this up. Shadow Energy Minister Dan Tehan was not about to let that slide. He tore into Bowen on Sky News, telling chief anchor Kieran Gilbert that the Energy Minister had given the clear impression his announcement would take effect immediately, and it simply was not happening. Farmers and regional communities who were already struggling to get fuel delivered were now waiting on a ministerial paperwork trail that nobody could give a clear timeline for. Tehan's frustration was pointed and precise. Bowen will not state when the paperwork will be done, and he will not state when the fuel will actually arrive in rural and regional Australia. Two very basic questions, zero clear answers, in a national crisis. And this is the part that cuts deepest. Rural and regional Australians are not waiting on an abstract policy debate. They are waiting on diesel to run their farms, their machinery, their transport routes. Every day of delay is a day of lost productivity, lost income, and compounding stress for communities that are already stretched thin. When a city minister misses a deadline, it is an embarrassing news cycle. But when that delay affects fuel supply to the bush, real people pay a real price. Tehan made the call that many Australians are increasingly thinking. It is time for Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to step in and take over from his Energy Minister. Not because the situation is politically inconvenient, but because the transparency has evaporated. Daily updates on fuel supply status have gone quiet. The public does not know exactly how many days of supply remain, and critically, some of those reserves are allocated specifically for the military and emergency services, meaning the buffer available to everyday Australians is even thinner than the headline numbers suggest. Bowen's defense, that the changes would not flow immediately due to supply chain complexities, and that the government had ensured Australia was as well prepared as we possibly could be. That last line is the one that stings, because if this is as well prepared as we possibly could be, a minister who announces solutions before completing the legal requirements to implement them, a crisis that went from non-existent to national in 48 hours, and rural communities still waiting on fuel, then the bar for preparedness in this government is sitting somewhere near the floor. Tehan noted that Bowen has form here. Across previous ministerial roles, the pattern of bold announcements without matching execution has followed him. Australia is now experiencing that pattern at the worst possible time, in the middle of a genuine energy emergency, with a global conflict driving prices higher by the day. The paperwork matters. The timeline matters. The transparency matters, and right now, on all three counts, the Albanese government is coming up short. Thanks for watching, Australia. See you in the next one.